When Lillian Randolph's daughters came home that Sunday evening in May, they expected to find their mother getting ready for a church banquet. Instead, the coffee pot was still on, the house was quiet, and Lillian was nowhere to be found. The last anyone saw of her, she had been standing at her front door in capri pants and a blouse, waving goodbye. At first, authorities thought she might return on her own. She never did. Hello, friends. My name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders, where we explore the unsolved cases that still haunt America. In 1965, Guthrie Center was still very much a small Iowa town, where distance and closeness existed side by side. People went to church. They belonged to clubs. They knew which cars belonged on which roads, and strangers had a way of standing out. But Iowa itself was changing. Farming was becoming more specialized. Agricultural businesses were becoming more modern and more profitable for those positioned well. In a place like Guthrie Center, a man with money, property, and business influence could carry a certain kind of power, and Howard Randolph had all three. Howard met 56-year-old Lillian Elizabeth Hedman in northern Minnesota, where Howard had a vacation home. After they married in 1958, the family settled in Guthrie Center, where he built an expensive ranch-style home near the south end of the municipal golf course. This was Lillian's third marriage and Howard's second. Lillian had 4 children from her previous marriages: Henry, Anne, Wendy, and Vicky. And shortly after the marriage, Howard adopted them and they took his last name. Howard also had a son, Richard, from his first marriage, who lived with his ex-wife. But 5 years into the marriage, things began to sour and Lillian sought a legal separation. Howard, a wealthy Guthrie Center poultry and egg processor, was ordered to pay support in the amount of $800 a month. That's the equivalent of about $8,300 today. And while Henry and Anne were both married with families of their own, 16-year-old Wendy and 14-year-old Vicky lived with Lillian in the house. Howard rented an apartment in town. Lillian was active in her church and was in charge of the mother-daughter banquet at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church the evening she disappeared. She was also active in the Guthrie County Club of Iowa Democratic Women and had recently been named chairman of the Canvass Committee. On Sunday, May 2, 1965, Lillian and her 2 daughters attended church that morning as usual. At about noon, Howard stopped by the house to pick up Wendy and Vicky and take them to the Ice Follies in Des Moines. That was the last time she was seen alive. She had been waving goodbye from the doorway of the home Howard had built for her on the edge of the golf course, in the town where she'd made her life. The girls returned about 6 p.m. Howard dropped them off but didn't go inside the house. The girls found the coffee pot on and everything seemed to be in order, but their mother wasn't there. Think about that scene for a moment. In 1965, appliances didn't have automatic safety shutoffs. If Lillian was taken shortly after noon, which is the accepted theory, that coffee pot may have been sitting on the element for hours. If the coffee had scorched, it would support the idea that Lillian disappeared soon after her daughters left. If it had not, it raises another question. Did Lillian disappear later than the investigators believed? But whether the girls smelled scorched coffee or not, one thing was immediately clear. Lillian was not where she was supposed to be. Lillian had planned to take the girls to the mother-daughter banquet at the church that evening, so Wendy headed over to the church to see if her mother was there. She wasn't. Wendy then went to her sister Anne's home to see if her mother had dropped by there. She hadn't. Alarmed, Anne called the sheriff at 7 p.m. At first, authorities didn't treat Lillian's disappearance as the emergency it would later become. In 1965, an adult woman being gone for a short time didn't always trigger the same urgency it might today. But Lillian was a woman with responsibilities, social ties, and commitments. On the night she disappeared, people were expecting her. That's part of what makes the disappearance so immediate. She vanished on a day when her absence was going to be noticed quickly. Looking back, that delay leaves an uncomfortable question. What might have been found if the case had been treated as suspicious from the beginning? Police would eventually question family, acquaintances, and other individuals who knew Lillian. Witnesses reported seeing a white 1960 Cadillac near her home on the day before and the day of her disappearance. A gas station attendant working at a station on the outskirts of Guthrie Center remembered the car stopping for gas and described the driver as a 6-foot, 200-pound man in his middle 30s. A group of golfers at the Guthrie Center Golf Club, half a mile north of the Randolph home, reported seeing a white car of the same description on the road heading toward Lillian's place late Sunday morning. They reported there were two black-haired men in the car. As Howard and the girls were driving north from the Randolph home that Sunday afternoon, Wendy looked back and saw a car of similar description pull in the driveway. It leaves you wondering about the view from the front seat. If 16-year-old Wendy could see a massive white luxury car pulling into the driveway from the back window, did Howard see it too? And if he did, why didn't he turn around to see who was pulling into the driveway of the woman he had just left standing at the door? Guthrie was a small town where people noticed strangers. That matters in this case because the white Cadillac stood out enough for multiple people to remember it. But investigators never located the vehicle or the men reportedly inside it. That leaves the case suspended between two possibilities. Either the Cadillac was the key to the murder, or it became a powerful but unresolved detail that could never be proven. On May 11th, 9 days after Lillian disappeared, State Agent Warren Stump was checking the parking lots at the Des Moines Municipal Airport and recognized Lillian's car as one that had been mentioned in the missing persons report. It was in a parking lot north of the terminal building, and he could smell a foul odor coming from it. Agent Stump called for T.A. Thompson, the chief of the Iowa Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and Andrew Newquist, an identification expert who took fingerprints and other evidence from the car. The car itself was unlocked and the key was in the ignition in the off position. Lillian's purse, containing $11, was under the driver's seat. At 10:30 a.m., investigators forced open the trunk of the blue four-door 1965 Dodge Coronet. Inside was the badly decomposed body of a female. The body was fully clothed in capri pants, a blouse, and shoes, and appeared to have been in the trunk for some time, perhaps as long as 6 or 7 days. That raises even more questions. Lillian had been missing for 9 days, but if she'd been in the trunk for only 6 to 7, that leaves an unexplained gap of 48 to 72 hours. Was this simply a calculation error on the part of the medical examiner, or was she kept alive somewhere in captivity during those first 2 or 3 days? Investigators brought Howard to the scene, but he was unable to determine if the victim was his estranged wife. The body was taken to Dunn Funeral Home on Grand Avenue for autopsy, where dental records confirmed the identity. Lillian Randolph had been located. Dr. Leo Luca, Polk County Medical Examiner, was unable to immediately determine the cause of death, but believed it was murder. It would later be determined that she had suffered 12 stab wounds to the chest. The murder weapon was believed to have been a small pocket knife. No motive was officially established. While Lillian's body was found in the trunk of her car at the Des Moines airport, investigators did not know where she was killed. They checked local motels and hotels to determine if she had stayed at any during the 9 days she was missing, but was unable to find any evidence she had done so. That opens up questions about whether she was attacked at home, taken elsewhere, or moved after death. The uncertainty also affects the timeline and whether more than one person may have been involved. Authorities would eventually suggest the killing might have been professional, but that raises other questions. If this was a professional job, why use what was believed to be a small pocket knife? Why leave the car unlocked and her purse behind? Those details do not rule out a hired killer, but they do make the theory less plausible than it first appears. There's also the nature of the crime itself. 12 stab wounds to the chest. That's an incredibly intimate, high-energy way to kill somebody. A pocket knife requires close contact. It suggests physical struggle, panic, anger, or something much more personal than a distant, calculated execution. If this was a professional hit, then whoever carried it out left behind a scene that looked far less like a clean execution and far more like something personal. There was fear among the community that the killer would strike again. Doors and windows were kept locked. Loaded guns were kept near front doors. Parents worried when children ran late. Anywhere you went in Guthrie Center, sooner or later the conversation would turn to Lillian's murder. Lillian's funeral was held at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Her body was then taken to Duluth, Minnesota, where she was laid to rest in the Hedman family plot in the Oneota Cemetery. Her marker simply reads, Daughter Lillian, 1908-1965. A woman who had raised a family and 4 children, remembered in stone only as someone's daughter. Wendy and Vicki initially went to live with Anne, but eventually moved to Des Moines to live with their half-brother Henry and his wife. Anne and her family would ultimately leave Guthrie Center. All the children would eventually drop the Randolph name. Whether that was grief, distance, or something else, none of them ever said publicly. Howard moved back into the family home. He would continue to live in Guthrie Center until his death in 1994. As the estranged spouse, Howard naturally became a suspect. He was ordered to pay $200 a month for temporary support of Wendy and Vicky as he and Henry battled for custody. Howard did win the right to remove the girls from the Des Moines public school they were attending and send them to private school at his expense so they would receive an education commensurate with their social standing as the daughters of Howard Randolph. The wording matters here. In the court's language, they were not simply grieving daughters. They were also being framed through Howard's name, his status, and his expectations. Howard was eventually sued by 2 attorneys who represented Wendy and Vicky during support and custody issues. The attorneys also provided financial assistance to the girls when Howard refused to. This included money to travel to Duluth when Lillian was buried, money with which to purchase some clothing, and money for bus tickets to visit relatives in order to be temporarily removed from the crime scene. The court records paint a picture. Refusing to pay for the girls' clothing, their travel to their mother's burial, or their basic needs, while simultaneously fighting for custody and insisting they attend private school befitting his social standing. It's a strange combination that raises questions about his motives. And this is where the case moves from documented court records into a more controversial area. After Howard's death, author Carol McKibben wrote a book, Lillian's Legacy, Marriage and Murder in Rural Iowa, where he accuses Howard of the murder. I've linked it below in case you're interested. According to McKibben, Howard was a tightwad, giving Lillian very little money. Although she was active in church and several other local organizations, he claims Howard kept Lillian in isolation and people hardly knew her. He also claims that Howard was physically abusive and had relationships with several other women during the marriage. I'm unable to independently confirm those allegations as the file into Lillian's death is sealed since it is still an active investigation. Whether that means investigators believe the case is solvable or simply that it was never officially closed is itself an answer no one's given. I've also found nothing in the public records to support any of these claims. McKibben also claims that Howard's motive was to rid himself of Lillian so he could stop the monthly support payments, regain custody of his daughters, and his home. McKibben believes the men in the Cadillac were hired by Howard to kill Lillian. I'm not sure I agree. While I can agree that the court filings do suggest Howard was extremely reluctant to spend money on the girls, that also complicates the custody theory for me. If he was unwilling to pay for their clothing, travel, or basic needs after Lillian's death, it raises a fair question. Was custody truly the motive, or was it more about control, reputation, money, or the house? And was Howard ruthless enough to kill Lillian to get his way? It's important to note here that investigators have never found the Cadillac, the men who were in it, or any evidence that Howard was involved. Did he have the means to hire hitmen? Absolutely. But would professional hitmen really use a pocket knife to kill someone? Howard Randolph has remained the most controversial figure in this story, not because investigators publicly proved his involvement, but because so many roads do seem to lean toward him. The separation, the support payments, the custody battle. But suspicion is not proof, and the sealed case file leaves many of the strongest claims impossible to independently verify. More than 60 years later, the murder of Lillian Randolph remains frozen in time. The physical evidence has aged, the principal players have passed away, and the town of Guthrie Center has moved on. Howard Randolph died in 1994, never legally tied to the crime, but forever shadowed by the questions around it. Perhaps the most heartbreaking piece of this tragedy sits in that Duluth cemetery. Lillian was a mother of 4, a church volunteer, a political organizer, and a woman trying to build an independent life in a time when that was not always easy. Yet her marker simply reads, daughter. And maybe that's why this case still lingers, because Lillian Randolph was more than someone's daughter, someone's wife, or someone's former wife. She was a woman with a life, a family, responsibilities, and plans for that Sunday evening. The last known image of her was ordinary, standing at the front door waving goodbye to her daughters. What happened after that moment remains locked inside an unsolved case, a sealed file, and a truth that has never fully come into the light. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.